Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're heading down south to La Paz, Mexico. Beautiful city on the Baja California Peninsula. And, you guys sent in these really interesting documents about a historical and legal dispute happening there. So we're going to kind of try and untangle what's at stake here in a neighborhood called Colonia Colina del Sol Barrio El Esterito.
Yeah, it's like a classic David and Goliath situation.
Oh, really?
This group of residents taking on the city government and a private developer
Oh, wow.
to try and save a historic street called Calle Norte from being swallowed up by this new development project.
Calle Norte. So their main weapon in this is a document called, I think it's literally called callenorte.pdf.
Yeah.
And it's just packed with all of this historical research and these passionate arguments. And it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
So to help us navigate all this, we've got an expert here who understands all the ins and outs of land rights, development, and community action. So what's the core issue here that the residents are bringing up?
So they're petitioning the La Paz government to formally recognize and protect Calle Norte, which they claim is much older than even the town itself.
Oh, wow.
They're saying that this street, Calle Norte, actually predates even the town's formal establishment in 1861, and that its historical dimensions are just being totally ignored by the city in favor of this new development.
So they're saying this street existed before La Paz was even officially La Paz. That's a pretty big claim.
It is a big claim.
How are they backing that up?
Well, they're using this really interesting strategy. They're pointing to the differences between like the modern city plans and historical records.
Okay.
So they've gone and they've dug up old documents and maps, some even mentioning a Governor Theodore Riverol from 1861, to prove that Calle Norte did exist and it had specific dimensions.
So they've really done their homework.
Yeah, they've done their research.
It seems like it. But what exactly is causing this whole dispute? Is it just the history of the street, or is there something more to it?
Well, it goes beyond just the history. There's this private development project, a multi-story building that's being constructed by Alberto Forcada Gonzalez.
Okay.
And residents are saying it's encroaching on land that historically belonged to Calle Norte. So essentially, they're accusing the La Paz government of putting the developers' interests above the community and their neighborhood's history.
So it's that kind of classic fight of the neighborhood versus big development.
Yeah.
But the residents are going beyond just complaining about it, right? They're actually taking action.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They've even formed, I believe it's called the Comité de Defensa, which is a defense committee, to organize their efforts. And they're not just like, we don't like this, They're meticulously going through and using historical evidence and legal arguments to show that Calle Norte wasn't just some small pathway, but a key feature of this, pre-1861 landscape.
So let's dive into those arguments. What kind of historical specifics are they bringing up to kind of paint this picture of what Calle Norte was?
Okay, so they state that Calle Norte was originally a full 20 meters wide, which is actually significantly larger than what modern plans are showing.
Wow.
And they're using existing landmarks to actually outline the street's original boundaries, things like Altamirano and Revolution Streets, which still exist today.
So they're saying, look, these landmarks have been here forever, and they show how wide this street used to be.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty clever. What other evidence do they have?
Well, they even mention, surviving elements, like the banqueta, which is the sidewalk, and the guarniciones, which are the curbs, as proof. And there's even a stream bed and a road leading down to the highway that they claim actually mark the historical edge of this street. So they're making a pretty comprehensive picture.
It sounds like they're saying this isn't just some abstract thing. The proof is literally right there in the landscape.
Exactly. And they don't stop there. They go on and use data to show how this new development will affect the neighborhood.
What kind of data are they presenting?
So they're estimating that this project could end up having 2 to 7-story buildings across 226 lots, with potentially 164 apartments in total. So that's a big increase in density.
Yeah, that would definitely change the character of the neighborhood.
For sure.
Are they worried about the infrastructure being able to handle all that?
Definitely. They specifically mention water usage. So they estimate that the new apartments would consume 38 to 71 million liters of water per year. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's like the yearly water usage of hundreds of average homes. So they're concerned that the current systems just can't support that.
So they're saying that this is about more than just preserving history. It's about practical things that are going to affect their lives now and in the future.
Yes, exactly. And there's another layer to this argument, this legal one, that actually gets even more interesting.
Oh, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
This is where it gets really interesting. they're bringing up this legal thing called expropriation.
Expropriation. I've heard of that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't really know what it means.
Okay, so basically, expropriation is when a government, like, takes private property, but they take it for public use,
Okay.
even if the owner doesn't want to sell it. But there's specific legal procedures they have to follow,
Uh-huh.
including giving fair compensation to the owner.
So are the residents saying that the city should have gone through that whole expropriation thing if they wanted to use that land from Calle Norte for the development?
Exactly, that's what they're saying. They're
Wow.
saying it didn't happen, and that violates their rights as citizens, and they're getting into, like, the legal stuff.
Oh, wow.
Citing Article 16 of the Baja California Sur Constitution, which is specifically about expropriation.
Okay, so what does Article 16 say and how does it apply here?
Well, it lays out the rules for how the government can take private property. It says that it can only be done for public use and with proper legal steps, like
right.
offering fair compensation to the property owner. And the residents are saying that this development doesn't meet those rules.
So it's not just about the street's history. It's about whether the city followed the rules, basically.
Right. Exactly. And they didn't.
Yeah, they're like, even if you want to change things, you got to play by the rules.
Right. They're making a strong legal case, along with their historical arguments.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And they're making some pretty big accusations against the government.
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
They're claiming that the government didn't even talk to them
Oh, wow.
before approving the project, that they were playing favorites with the developer, and that they cared more about the money than saving the neighborhood's history.
Those are some pretty serious accusations.
Yeah.
Do they have any examples?
Yeah. They point out that some city departments, like the Commissions of Water and Hacienda and Patrimony and Urban Planning, they all had concerns about the project when they were approving it.
So even from the beginning, there were problems.
Exactly. But the residents say those warnings were ignored,
Hmm.
and it makes them feel like no one was listening to them,
Yeah.
not even the experts.
So the city government doesn't look so good here.
Right. They look like they just wanted to build the project no matter what. And this shows how citizens can use their knowledge to hold the government accountable.
This document is like a guide for activism. They're doing their research, organizing themselves, and making their arguments in a really smart way.
It's impressive.
It is. They're not just complaining, they're doing something about it.
It shows that citizens can make a difference when they know what they're talking about and care enough to get involved.
And they're using history, legal stuff, and personal stories all together.
Right. They're showing how it's all connected.
Yeah.
The history of Calle Norte shows them what their rights are, and the problems this development will cause make them want to fight.
They're not just saying, we don't want this building. They're saying, this is our history, these are our rights, and this development is wrong.
And they're showing that there are real people behind all this by including photos and signatures of the people on the Comité de Defensa.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that this isn't just about laws and history, it's about real people's lives.
It's good to remember that even though we're talking about history and laws and city planning, it's all about how this affects the neighborhood.
And we need to talk about the human cost of this development, if it happens.
I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've learned about the legal arguments, the historical evidence, and the community's fight for justice. We'll continue our deep dive in a moment. We've been looking at this callenorte.pds document and the residents' fight to save their street and their neighborhood. It seems like they feel a real connection to this place, like a sense of belonging that goes beyond just living there.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this so interesting. It's not just about a street. It's about the people who live there. They talk about generations of families living there and Calle Norte being a central place for them.
Yeah.
Like a landmark that they remember and identify with.
Yeah, and I see that in the document. They're giving specific examples of how this development is going to mess up their lives.
Yeah. They're worried about more traffic, noise, and problems with basic services like water and trash. They're afraid of losing green spaces and the impact on local businesses.
Yeah.
And even that people who have lived there a long time might not be able to afford to stay.
I think anyone who has seen their neighborhood change a lot can relate to that. It's easy to talk about progress, but when you see how it affects people's lives, it's not so simple.
Exactly. And that's what the residents are fighting against. They're asking, what is progress and who decides? Is it just about money, or is it about the people, their history, and their sense of place?
They're saying that progress should include everyone, be sustainable, and respect the past. They're challenging the idea that development is always good, especially if it means pushing people out or erasing their history.
And this is something we see happening in cities all over the world, you know? How do we balance the need for growth and modernization with keeping the character and heritage of our communities? How do we make sure that progress helps everyone and not just a few?
So as we finish looking at this document, what are the main things we've learned? What do you hope people will think about after hearing this?
Well, first, it reminds us how powerful citizen engagement can be. These residents are doing something, not just sitting around. They're researching, advocating for their rights, and showing that we all have a voice and can shape our communities.
It's inspiring to see how they're using historical knowledge, legal arguments, and personal stories to make their case. It shows that change doesn't just happen. It takes effort and organization.
Second, it highlights how important it is to think about how development affects people. Progress shouldn't mean pushing people out, erasing their history, or disrupting their lives. We need to balance economic growth with social equity and historical preservation.
We need to ask ourselves, what kind of future are we building and who benefits from it?
And finally, this reminds us that history is not just in books. It's alive in the places we live, the streets we walk, and the stories we tell. It shapes who we are and our communities. It's worth protecting.
This deep dive has definitely shown me how complex development is and how important community activism is. I hope it's given our listeners something to think about.
Me too. Maybe we'll even inspire them to look closer at their own community. Think about the stories in its streets and buildings and how they can help shape its future.
Thanks for joining us on this journey to La Paz, Mexico. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive.